Welcome to Khealos' Gaming Table. I am Khealos. On this channel I talk about tabletop RPGs, miniature war games, and at least for the near future I'm going to be talking about different sci-fi franchises. I have been thinking about some videos, actually getting back to gaming, but I've been having fun rambling about the different franchises that I really enjoy and grew up on and have influenced me as a person, as a writer, as a game master, you know, however you want to look at it. Somebody's probably eventually going to ask, you know, hey, Khealos, are you going to do Firefly? Yeah, probably not. Firefly lasted, what, half a season? Had one movie, and while I can appreciate the characters and the story and the setting, I'm not as attached to it as other people. You know, I don't get the whole, you know, whenever the, you know, top sci-fi franchises come up, you know, all the brown shirts, you know, log on and spam Firefly. But I have a lot more attachment to other shows, you know, whether it be Doctor Who, Star Trek, Babylon 5. All of these I would much rather see continuations of, you know, if they're off the air, than Firefly. Besides, you know, Firefly did go off the air, what, 20 years ago? Maybe more? Has it been that long? Yeesh. But at any rate, I enjoy watching it. I like the characters. I like the setting. But I don't put a whole lot of thought into it because I never got that attached to it. You know, I'll freely admit I missed it around the first run. I was sad that it didn't get picked up, but it was like... Anyway, you know, the franchise I'm going to talk about this morning, I do have a bit more history with, and it's one of the longer running, at least US franchises, and that was, although it has gone dormant, hopefully it's going to be coming back. And that is Stargate, specifically SG-1. It's SG-1 is based off of the, what is it, 99? Whatever. Whenever the movie came out, starring James Spader and Kurt Russell, and the idea is that the pyramids were in fact built by aliens as landing pads for their spacecraft. And the Stargate, which is a giant ring with a bunch of different glyphs on it, and James Spader figures out that the glyphs are coordinates. You know, you could create coordinates for something using 6 different points in space, and then a 7th for a destination. And after they figure that out, they're able to transport themselves to another planet. And, you know, they find the big bad alien, you know, fight it, find that humans were taken to this planet and used as slaves, and originally here on Earth, you know, they were enslaved, but they figured out how to read and united, and so, you know, reading is pretty much outlawed on this other planet. The big bad is defeated, everyone goes home happy, well, all the survivors at any rate. Well, the idea about SG-1 is, you know, they were looking for a property or something to, you know, create a series of, so they decided to pick that up and run with it. And the idea was that Ra, the big bad of Stargate, wasn't the last survivor of his species, but, you know, but the leader of a vast network of bad guys. We'll call them bad guys, the Goa'uld. And Earth had been, you know, pulled out of the Stargate Matrix or whatever it was, but they figured out how to get it added back in. And Earth realized that there is a bigger threat. And they were very well equipped, you know, because we're talking like the late 90s, early 2000s, or whenever it came out, you know, with the technology of that time frame. So they recast the entire thing. You know, Daniel Jackson was not played by James Spader, but, I forget the actor's name now. And Richard Dean Anderson of MacGyver fame played Jack O'Neill, but he didn't play it quite as the straight-laced, no-nonsense, all-business Kurt Russell Jack O'Neill. He played him a bit more snarky, a bit more comedic, and in general, a much better character. They introduced Amanda Tapping as Samantha Carter, a very smart, no nonsense. Well, she did have some nonsense, but you know, a woman in the Air Force, you know, trying to prove herself. And I think one of the best things was from the pilot when she's trying to fix something. Was it the pilot? Maybe it was a later episode. And basically she says, you know, I've got to figure out how to MacGyver that, you know, and I can't imagine how many takes that took to not have Anderson break up, considering, you know, he played MacGyver in the 80s. But the early seasons were about so after they realized that there are still enemies in the galaxy, they start charting out different planets that they can go to, and they travel to them through, you know, the Stargate. A bunch of airmen got kidnapped, and some of them were killed, so they went to, you know, the planet and rescued them. But along the way they met Teal'c, who was the first prime of Apophis, effectively, you know, the general of all of the enemy warriors. And the Jaffa, despite being, you know, mostly loyal to them, to the Goa'uld, also longed to be free. And, you know, Teal'c basically said that, you know, he has seen many people that have tried to rise up against the Goa'uld, all have gotten crushed, but for the first time he actually believed, you know, the humans, you know, Jack O'Neill and his team would be able to do it, so he joins the team. So the first several seasons were about the SG-1 teams, Stargate teams, different teams traveling to planets looking for allies, new technology, that kind of thing, because, you know, the Goa'uld couldn't really travel to Earth anymore through the Stargate because, you know, they built a closing iris around it so that if somebody tries to come through without broadcasting an all clear, you know, they're going to travel through the wormhole and, you know, go splat against that iris. And a lot of the stories are, again, you know, good science fiction has social and moral quandaries in them. There's some humorous episodes, and I felt that the show was exceptionally well written, and, you know, so did a lot of people. I mean, it ran for 10 seasons before they finally canceled it. You know, it's one of the longest running American sci-fi shows. It might be the longest running American sci-fi show, and, you know, Brits have to keep reminding people that, you know, Doctor Who's been running, you know, started running in the 1960s, so it's got that beat. But at any rate, that's another debate for another day. But SG-1 was smart in how they did things because, you know, they traveled to different planets using the Stargate. That saved on a lot of budget because they could reuse the visual effects for the Stargate activation. They didn't have to worry about spaceships, at least not till later in the show. You know, and they just step through and, you know, they're on another sound set or another stage or another location, you know, up in Vancouver, British Columbia, because, you know, that's where the majority of it was filmed due to tax purposes. But as the show, you know, progressed, they did the humans, the Tauri, as they're called by the Goa'uld, did start to pick up different allies, and as opposed to being on the defensive, actually started going on the offensive. Apophis being the big bad for several seasons. He's a Goa'uld that really he initiated everything because he's the one that opened up the Stargate after everyone thought it was over. Started kidnapping people, and that's when the Earth realized that there were more out there, and if they wanted to defend themselves, they've got to get their shit together. Along the way, you know, they did find some more allies. You know, one of the more hilarious ones was Thor. You know, not this giant, you know, Viking god, but this little gray alien, you know, who happened to, you know, take that name or give that name because a lot of Earth's mythology was actually apparently based off these aliens, which, you know, you can find comedic or possibly insulting depending upon if that's part of your culture or not. But, you know, don't take it too seriously because I don't think they did. But, you know, the show ran for 10 seasons. I thought the quality of the show started dropping off around season 7 because it had a bunch of really strong seasons, but it ran into the same problem that, you know, most stories that run for that long are, is you have to keep up in the ante. You have to keep increasing the threat level. You know, after you've saved the planet once, what are you going to do to, you know, up that ante? Because there was an episode where they're talking about, well, don't you guys want to help save the planet? And O'Neill and Teal'c look at whoever asked, and it's like, you know, we've saved the planet, we've saved Earth 7 times. You know, at that point it becomes old hat. You know, first you have the Goa'uld. They were the big bads, and ultimately they were defeated, you know, one by one, because, you know, they're megalomaniacal aliens that refuse to actually work together. You know, all jockeying for position until they finally realize that, you know, divided that they're going to fall. They tried to unite, but, you know, in true bad guy fashion, you know, they backstab while trying to get ahead. But, you know, the characters were very interestingly written, and they actually had Air Force advisors, because at that point in time, anything dealing with space fell under the purview of the Air Force. And everyone, you know, wondered why, you know, in the original Stargate, you know, all of them were Air Force officers and enlisted men, as opposed to, you know, the Army or the Marines or whatever the case is. But, you know, that they got realistic, and they actually several, I think the actual Air Force member of the Joint Chiefs appeared on the show, you know, in an obvious flashback episode, you know, briefing the new president, who thought that, you know, his leg was being pulled when they said, you know, day one, welcome, Mr. President, and now we get to talk to you about, you know, the greatest national secret that we have, you know, the Stargate program. And, you know, the guy playing the president's like, yeah, come on, pull the other one. Okay, I realize I'm the new guy in town, but let's be real. And then, you know, proceeds to tell them about that. Yeah, and obviously not all of the antagonists of the show were Goa'uld or other aliens. There was a rogue organization called the NID. I forget what it stands for, National something something something. At any rate, they wanted to use the Stargates for more nefarious purposes, more clandestine stuff, you know, again, to get technology, but as opposed to negotiating for it in good faith and making allies, they, you know, flat out stole it. Good morning. And they work to, you know, destabilize governments, put, you know, puppets in power, you know, whatever the case is, all kinds of, you know, nasty stuff like that. But, and, you know, like most good shows, it had its very serious and hard-hitting episodes, and it also had some very comedic episodes as well. I think one of my favorites, I forget what the episode called is, but it's effectively a Groundhog Day episode. When they're exploring a planet, there's some sort of solar something or other going on, and they're supposed to get out of there before the corona massive erupts. And something happens, and Jack, O'Neill, and Teal'c are stuck in a time loop. They're the only ones that can remember everything. So effectively, you know, after 12, 18 hours, whatever the case is, the loop restarts and they start over again. And it'll, you know, they have to explain, hey, you know, this is a time loop, this is what's going on, and comedy ensues. You know, there's some, you know, heartstrings at the end of the episode, don't get me wrong, but, you know, that's one of my favorite episodes. But the escalation was the biggest issue that I had with the show, because first you have the Goa'uld, you know, your, you know, garden variety threat to the, you know, the planet and security. Then you have the replicators, and those are basically an alien that, you know, kind of the SG-1 version of the Borg. You know, they go in and start eating everything and replicating, you know, hence the name. And if you don't like spiders, you're not going to like these, because at least initially, they all look like, these cybernetic robotic spiders. And, they can build more complex things. And, they get trapped in a submarine. A ship crashed, some of them managed to escape onto a submarine, so then they have, the SG-1 team has to go on that submarine and scuttle it and try and destroy them. And then but then they're threatening the Asgard. Those are the gray aliens. And then the final few seasons were the Ori, and this is where I really didn't like it, because it was like the Goa'uld, but they upped it. It's like another, because the thing about the Goa'uld, sorry for the ramble, I'm obviously going from point to point, and that's how my brain works. They set themselves up as gods, and due to their long-lived nature, they can often get away with that. But that's part of the propaganda. They're gods. They might live for hundreds or thousands of years, whereas your average human might live for 100. With good medical care, maybe longer. And part of what SG-1 did was, show the galaxy at large, or at least the areas that the Goa'uld controlled, that they weren't gods. They were defeatable. Not necessarily very easy, but it could be done. But the Ori were, next stage of that, just bigger, badder Goa'uld, and, declaring themselves gods with, magical powers, technologically, whatever. And I just didn't like that. I felt that, they had already done, the Goa'uld, let's go with a different threat, but I'm not the writer on the show. That's what they went with. Despite not liking the big bads, like a lot of shows, I kept coming back because of the cast. There was great chemistry between the main cast of SG-1, and even when Jack O'Neill, Richard Dean Anderson took a step back, into a more supporting role as opposed to a lead. We had Colonel Cameron Mitchell step in. And, took a little while to get used to him, but I liked Ben Browder, especially from Stargate, from Farscape. And then you had Claudia Black, who came in also from Farscape as Vala, I think that was her name. But in general, I watched it more for, the character interactions, some of the stories, and, despite not liking the big bad, the Ori weren't always the villain of the week. There was a lot of other stuff. But SG-1, I missed it originally because it was on Showtime, and at that point I didn't have Showtime. Somebody lent me the videotapes, DVDs, and then I watched them as I painted, because one of the things that I do, when I pick an army, when I used to pick an army for like Warhammer 40K, I will often sit down with some sort of a show, and that's the theme of the show for me, because I'll paint and watch the same show from at least until I run out of episodes. And I think it was my Tyranid army back in the early 2000s for 4th edition of 40K. That's where I painted a lot to SG-1, and due to the popularity of the show, it spawned it had two spin-offs. The first one being Stargate Atlantis, where the gate builders, the ancients, whatever you want to call them, had created, a super gate or a special gate that could actually transport you to an entirely different galaxy. The power requirements for it were astronomical, and they have this device called a ZPM or ZPM, depending upon your pronunciation of the letter Z as in zebra. One of the doctors was Canadian, so, they said Zed. And, I just picked up on it. At any rate, rambling ahead, Come to find out, the city of Atlantis did in fact exist. The city of Atlantis did in fact get swallowed by the ocean. It wasn't the ocean on Earth. Atlantis had been transported to a different galaxy, the Pegasus galaxy. And the Stargate teams and their scientists had managed to find a mostly charged, I don't remember if it was a fully charged ZPM. So they decided to put a team together and travel to the Pegasus galaxy. Kind of like, Voyager getting stuck in a different part of the galaxy. The premise was really good because being cut off, and that was the thing, once they got to the other planet, they were expecting, to find this fully functional city and people in it and, all this wild technology, and they found pretty much a graveyard. Not so much a graveyard, but the entire city of Atlantis had been abandoned. It had been underwater for so long. It had several ZPMs, but in order to maintain the shields to keep the water out, well, those have been drained over, 10,000 years, 100,000 years. I forget how long it had been sitting underwater. So, and they found out very quickly that as they explored the city, opening up, activating different things, that really started to drain the remaining power cells. Once they realized they were underwater and trapped, they thought they were boned, but I guess an emergency safety valve or mechanism was in place so that when the city could no longer maintain its shield integrity, it actually rose to the surface. So not only were they trapped on a different planet, they're in a different galaxy and they had no way to get home, and at that point they had no way to contact home. Along the way, they started to explore different places to try and get the people out of, because they didn't realize that Atlantis would rise to the surface, and they awakened an ancient evil, if you will, and the Wraith. And these are basically these giant humanoids that fed off of people, and they go into hibernation for 1,000 years, something like that, and let the human populations grow. And then when they become awake, for I don't know when the alarm clock gets set off, but when they awaken, they travel around all of these different planets, cull the people, feed, sometimes war against each other. All bad guys seem to want to, and some good guys want to war for resources. But the SG team that traveled to the planet that they were on woke them up early. And the Wraith didn't realize that the amount of time that they needed to be awake, that they needed to sleep, was ended early. So they get up, hey, let's start culling. But the people hadn't been fully repopulated, and they became the big bads of the show. And they're pretty gnarly looking. These giant vampires that basically touch you and can suck the life out of your body. And you come to find out, they can actually return life to a body as well. But why do that when you can suck somebody dry? The first season, probably one of the best, because I really liked that idea of them being cut off. No means of communication, no means to get home. So they actually have to struggle and make new contacts and figure out how they're going to survive. For either writing or rating's sake, somebody found, another ZPM was able to open up a portal or a Stargate and send some reinforcements over, but, it was the same kind of issue that I had with Voyager. Once they started having semi-regular contact with the Federation, a lot of that, I won't say threat, but a lot of the best storytelling of them being stuck on the other side of the galaxy, or in this case, stuck in a completely different galaxy, goes away. There's a bit of collaboration between the two shows, and eventually what they do is they start stealing different Stargates from planets and created a network between the two galaxies. Basically, you open up the Stargate to the first portal, and then there's a macro that is run that automatically dials, you know, the next one, so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, you no longer had that issue of not being able to communicate. Now, granted, there are still some good episodes in there. My favorite from Atlantis being, I forget what it's called, but Teal'c shows up, and he and Ronan Dax, played by Jason Momoa, basically square off and get stuck on the station in between galaxies, and the Goa'uld figure out how to hack Rodney's network, Rodney being the scientist that set up the, I think they called it the Stargate Bridge, something like that. I don't remember precisely. Somebody correct me in the comments below if you're a big fan or have access to Google. I don't exactly have that right now. And basically they have to work together, and they originally were antagonistic to each other. You know, Teal'c being the older veteran who knew how to play the system, who knew how the system worked, because they were going to interview Ronan Dax about his actions and different things, you know, basically vet him. And he didn't like, you know, having his loyalty questioned, having his whatever questioned, at any rate. So they worked together and, you know, saved the day. And just, I thought the interplay between the two of them was great. I wish we could have seen more between the two of them, but, you know, Christopher Judge, you know, probably had other obligations at that point. Still, it was a good episode. And then you had the ill-fated Stargate universe, where they discover the address to another Stargate, but this actually is aboard a starship, I think still in a different galaxy. A starship built by the ancients, by the gate builders, that actually went to planet and started dropping off different stargates on habitable planets. And that show didn't do very well. I think it lasted 2 seasons. My biggest issue with it, I mean, it had some great conflict, some great character interactions, but the problem was they have these stones that allow you to transfer your consciousness with somebody else, and apparently, you know, distance isn't a thing. You know, whoever has one set of the stones can swap their consciousness with whoever has the other set of stones. Infinite distance, you know, that's, you know, some MacGuffin magic right there. But too much of at least the initial show, was spent moving, you know, dealing with, you know, stuff on Earth. You know, again, for me, the conflict is truly them. The interesting conflict, I should say, is them being stuck on another planet or on another ship so far outside the norm that, you know, they have no way to communicate and working to get home. The show, when it was on the ship, was really good for me, but yeah, the Earth stuff I didn't care for, because it was basically just, you know, it was like a 90210 drama, as opposed to dealing with, you know, the science fiction aspect of the show. Will they ever revisit it? Probably not, but, you know, there's been some talk that since Amazon picked up MGM, I think, they're talking about either rebooting or bringing the show back, or continuation. I personally would prefer continuation because, you know, while it doesn't exactly follow the original lore of the Stargate movie, it did an exceptional job of building its own lore and its own story, and I'm far more attached to it than I was to the original movie. You know, if we get to see more Jack O'Neill, or get to see more, you know, the rest of the cast, I think that would be great, especially if we can get, you know, some new members of the cast. Yeah, some dude on like an electric skateboard. That's pretty cool. But, you know, I enjoyed SG-1. I go back and watch it periodically. You know, sure, it's obviously dated at this point, especially when, you know, you look at the old cell phones. You know, it's the same kind of thing. You can watch the evolution of cell phone technology on, you know, like a show like Supernatural, when they started with the, you know, old bricks or the old flip phones, and eventually, as the show progressed, it moved to, you know, more modern cell phones. But, you know, sometimes they had like a BlackBerry or an old Trio or something like that. And, and over time, they just kept upgrading the technology, same kind of thing in SG-1, you know. But it's, you know, it's a show of its time, and that's something that you have to remember, you know, watching old movies or TV shows, or I mean, even like Stranger Things, you know. I watched Stranger Things, and that certainly pulled at my nostalgia strings, because to a lesser extent, I was one of those kids during the 80s. During the summer, I would, you know, get on my bike and go hang out with my friends, and nobody would know where I was. You know, we would check in periodically, otherwise we get our butts beat. Not really, but, you know, as long as we checked in periodically and we were home before the sunset, you know, we didn't get in any trouble. You know, that shit doesn't fly today, especially with the helicopter parents. But yeah, I mean, I remember getting together with my friends and playing Dungeons and Dragons and other games. I mean, granted, there were no monsters, no real ones, no. The Upside Down, you know, wasn't a thing. But yeah, pre-internet, you had to actually research things, go to a place to look them up, as opposed to sitting at your computer or at your phone. But I'm sure in the future, people will look back at, you know, 2023 and think, oh wow, look at that phone, how cute. You know, whether, you know, they're, wherever the technology goes, you know, chances are television or movies will mostly get it wrong. But, you know, it's kind of the fun of looking at the future. And especially through, like, the lens of SG-1. Because it did keep up with so much stuff, you know, as, you know, technology progressed. But, yeah. If you haven't seen SG-1 and you want, you know, one of the formative American science fiction shows, definitely check it out. It's got a bunch of great characters. You know, it does have some stinker episodes, but there's no TV show that has all golden episodes. It does have some very hard-hitting social commentary, has some very humorous episodes. I do enjoy shows that don't just concentrate on the seriousness, you know, whether it's, you know, that episode, or my other favorite episode is where Jack O'Neill goes to bed one night, and he wakes up as like a 15-year-old kid. You know, he breaks into the base, and nobody believes him until he starts, you know, telling people things that only Jack O'Neill would know, and they're like, how in the hell did this happen? And you've got Jack O'Neill as a 15-year-old trying to get the respect that he normally would as a colonel. You know, as a full-bird colonel. And just, you know, the actor that they hired to play the young Jack O'Neill must have watched a lot of SG-1, among other things, because he got a lot of Richard Dean Anderson's mannerisms down fairly well. I think my other favorite episode, another Community episode, was Wormhole Extreme, and Extreme spelled Xtreme, where somebody had come up with this idea for a bunch of teams going through a wormhole device. Sound familiar? And, you know, they even figure out, you know, or not figure out, but the government let the series go to air because who's going to believe about a super secret government agency and program sending people to other planets through a wormhole, you know? But they wanted to find out, you know, who pitched it, how the idea came to fruition, and come to find out it's a character from a previous episode who was an alien, but had been taking drugs to basically block his memory when he started taking the drugs again, because he wanted to fit in on the planet. He didn't want to, you know, continue to be, you know, an outsider. And, you know, comedy ensues. A very humorous episode. I'm not sure who is streaming Stargate SG1, but you want a funny episode, and it's one of those episodes you really don't have to have watched the previous episode. Sure, get a little backstory between the team and the alien. I forget his name. He was on Sex and the City. He was also on White Collar. He was Mazzy, the conspiracy theorist that was, friends with the main hero of that show. That's where I remember him from. My wife gets him from Sex and the City, but he passed away in the recent history, so sad to see him gone. But he definitely gave some fantastic performances, memorable performances at any rate. And I think the as cliche as it might sound, the last favorite episode that I can think of, I think it was just called 200. It was the 200th episode. What's the 200 or the 100th? Well, at any rate, basically they get something happens and the Stargate can't activate, and they're stuck in the base, and then they start pitching different story ideas to the same character. I want to say his name is Willie, but I can't remember. That might have been the actor's name. And they start, pitching different ideas. Ultimately one of them, turns out to be, the Wizard of Oz, and all the actors, dress up in different roles, to fit the told story. There's one where they're all marionettes. There's one where effectively it's Farscape, but as opposed to Claudia Black and Ben Browder playing the characters that they did on the show, they dress up as different characters, and still have some puppets in there. And it's a very lighthearted and humorous episode. I know some people didn't like it. I absolutely love it, but I love corny stuff like that. It gets me to laugh, and some days that's what all you can ask for is a good laugh, because with the state of affairs today, there's too much crap going on. Sometimes you need a good laugh. I think I am going to see if I have access to whatever the streaming platform that has that, and see about watching one or multiple of those episodes, because I'm having that nice trip down memory lane. And nostalgia is a hell of a drug, let's face it. That's why so many different flashback things like Stranger Things are so popular. Flashback to the 80s when I grew up. Such a different time. You could get away with a whole lot more. Not that you necessarily want to, just that you could, because again, it was a different time, and I look forward to all the people that have been crapping on the 80s, for all of the faults that it has. When people look back, oh man, I can't believe you tried that in like 2020, because that invariably happens. But that's a decade or more away. At any rate, I'm going to head back to the hotel, have something to drink, figure out what kind of trouble I'm going to get into today. This is my ramble about Stargate SG1 and the SG1 franchise. What do you think of Stargate? Do you like it? Did you hate it? If you haven't seen it, give it a go. Again, classic science fiction, some great stuff. Some of it is absolutely dated, but some of it is timeless. But like and subscribe, leave me some comments below, and I'll catch you next time.